What if I told you that a king once won a war without lifting a single sword? That his enemies destroyed themselves while his army simply stood and watched? Sounds unbelievable, right? But this isn't just a legend, it's history. This is the story of King Jehoshaphat, a ruler unlike any other. While most kings relied on military power, political strategy, and human alliances, Jehoshaphat placed his trust in something far greater, God himself. And because of that, he witnessed victories that defied human logic. Under his reign, Judah experienced peace, prosperity, and divine protection. Nations that once sought to destroy him feared him instead. Why? Because they saw what happens when a leader chooses faith over fear. But here's the twist. His story doesn't end in triumph. Because one decision, one compromise, set off a chain reaction that changed everything. A single mistake that would not only affect him but would shape the future of an entire kingdom. What if I told you that no matter how strong your faith is today, one wrong alliance could undo everything? That's the real danger of success. It can make us careless. It can make us believe that we are untouchable, that we no longer need the wisdom we once sought, that we can handle things on our own. And that's exactly what happened to Jehoshaphat. So let me ask you, can one mistake alter the destiny of a nation? Can one moment of compromise change everything you've worked for? Jehoshaphat's story holds the answer. And whether we realize it or not, his story is still being repeated today. Leaders, businesses, families. So many start strong but lose their way because of one critical mistake. So stick with me until the end of this video because what we're about to uncover is more than just history. It's a lesson that could change your life. If this message resonates with you, don't forget to like this video to help spread the word. Share it with someone who needs to hear this. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful story. And before we dive in, comment below, I choose faith over compromise. Let's declare together that we will not repeat the mistakes of the past. Now let's step into the incredible, inspiring, and cautionary tale of King Jehoshaphat, the king who won without fighting but nearly lost it all because of one fatal decision. Jehoshaphat's faith-fueled reforms. When Jehoshaphat ascended to the throne, he inherited more than just a kingdom. He inherited a nation divided in its faith. Though Judah had experienced periods of revival, the lingering influence of idolatry still remained. Pagan altars stood in hidden places, and the hearts of many people were still drawn to the false gods worshipped by the surrounding nations. Other kings might have responded to this instability by strengthening their armies, fortifying their cities, or forging political alliances. But Jehoshaphat was different. Instead of relying on military power, he chose to build spiritual strength. He understood that true security did not come from swords and shields, but from a nation that was anchored in the fear of the Lord. His first major reform was not to expand Judah's borders or impose heavier taxes. It was to turn the hearts of the people back to God. To accomplish this, Jehoshaphat did something radical, something no king before him had ever done. He sent priests, Levites, and officials across the land, not to collect tribute or enforce laws, but to teach the people the word of God. These teachers carried the book of the law and traveled from town to town, ensuring that every man, woman, and child knew the commandments, the history, and the promises of the Lord. For the first time in generations, ordinary citizens weren't just following religious rituals, they were learning the truth behind their faith. This was a bold move. Most kings focused on temple ceremonies and sacrifices, leaving spiritual matters in the hands of priests. But Jehoshaphat understood that a nation could not be truly transformed if the people did not understand what they were worshiping. It wasn't enough to remove idols. He had to replace them with the knowledge of the one true God. And the results were astonishing. As the people embraced the teachings of God, Judah began to thrive like never before. A spiritual revival swept through the nation. The people no longer depended on empty traditions or foreign gods. They were rooted in the truth. With their faith renewed, the kingdom grew stronger, not through war, but through wisdom and obedience. Even Judah's enemies took notice. The surrounding nations, once eager to invade, now feared Jehoshaphat, not because of his army, but because they saw that God was with him. The Bible says that the fear of the Lord fell on all the surrounding kingdoms, so that they did not make war with Jehoshaphat. 2 Chronicles 17 verse 10. Jehoshaphat had proven something extraordinary. A nation's greatest strength is not found in its weapons, but in its worship. And as long as Judah remained faithful, they would remain unshaken. But as we will soon see, success can be a dangerous thing. Because what happens when a leader who trusts God completely begins to compromise? That is where Jehoshaphat's story takes a dramatic turn. The battle that Judah never had to fight. Jehoshaphat's faith had brought Judah peace and prosperity, but peace never lasts forever. One day, without warning, disaster struck. Messengers came running into the palace with urgent news. A vast army was marching toward Judah. The Moabites, Ammonites, and Meunites had formed a powerful alliance, and they were already deep within Judah's territory. The enemy was massive, their forces overwhelming, and their intention was clear: total destruction. For any king, this would have been a moment of sheer panic. The natural response would have been to mobilize the army, seek out allies, or prepare the city for siege. But Jehoshaphat did something completely different, something unheard of for a ruler facing an invasion. He didn't panic. He didn't turn to politics. He turned to prayer. Jehoshaphat gathered the people of Judah together in the temple courtyard, and there, before the entire nation, he lifted his voice to heaven and prayed, "Lord, the God of our ancestors, are you not the God who is in heaven? You rule over all the kingdoms of the nations. Power and might are in your hand, and no one can withstand you. We have no power to face this vast army that is attacking us. We do not know what to do, but our eyes are on you." 2 Chronicles 20 verses 6 and 12. That last line is one of the most powerful prayers ever spoken. We do not know what to do, but our eyes are on you. Jehoshaphat knew the truth. This battle was too big for Judah to fight alone. But instead of relying on human strategy, he declared total dependence on God. And God responded. Through the prophet Jahaziel, the Lord gave Judah an answer that must have shocked everyone. Do not be afraid or discouraged because of this vast army. For the battle is not yours, but God's. You will not have to fight this battle. Take up your positions, stand firm, and see the deliverance the Lord will give you. 2 Chronicles 20 verses 15 and 17. Imagine the scene. An enemy army is closing in, but instead of preparing for war, Jehoshaphat is told to simply stand firm and watch. And then, something even more radical happened. When it was time to march out, Jehoshaphat did not put his strongest warriors in front. He didn't send his best archers or his mightiest soldiers. Instead, he placed worshippers at the front of the army. Men with harps, trumpets, and voices filled with praise led the way, singing, "Give thanks to the Lord, for his love endures forever." No weapons. No war cries. Just worship. And then, the impossible happened. As soon as they began singing, God set ambushes against their enemies. Confusion broke out in the enemy camp. The Moabites and Ammonites turned against the Meunites, slaughtering them. Then, in their paranoia and rage, they turned on each other. By the time Judah arrived at the battlefield, there was no one left to fight. Their enemies had completely destroyed themselves. Judah didn't lift a single sword. The battle was won before they even arrived. The people of Judah spent 3 days collecting the spoils of war, gold, silver, and treasures left behind by their fallen enemies. And when they returned to Jerusalem, they didn't celebrate their military strength. They went straight to the temple to worship, because only God could have won this battle. This is more than just a historical event. It's a lesson in faith that still speaks to us today. Because victory doesn't come from strength. It comes from faith. So the next time you feel surrounded by problems too big to handle, remember this. You don't have to fight alone. The battle belongs to God. The first crack, a dangerous alliance with Ahab. 4 years, Jehoshaphat had ruled with wisdom and unwavering faith. He had sought God in every decision, led Judah into spiritual revival, and won battles through worship instead of war. But even the strongest leaders are not immune to missteps. Jehoshaphat's first mistake, the first crack in his otherwise solid foundation, came in the form of a dangerous alliance. Despite all that he had built, despite his trust in God, Jehoshaphat made a decision that would haunt him and his kingdom for years to come. He aligned himself with King Ahab of Israel. Ahab was not just any ruler. He was one of the most wicked kings in history. Under the influence of his wife, Jezebel, Ahab had led Israel into full-scale idolatry, abandoned the worship of the true God, and committed terrible injustices. His reign was marked by deception, murder, and rebellion against God. And yet, Jehoshaphat, a righteous king, chose to form an alliance with him. At first glance, it may have seemed like a logical political move. Judah and Israel were once a united kingdom, and peace between them would strengthen both nations. But Jehoshaphat failed to recognize a critical truth. You cannot make peace with someone who is at war with God. The consequences came swiftly. When Ahab decided to go to war against Aram, he invited Jehoshaphat to join him. Instead of seeking God's guidance as he had done in the past, Jehoshaphat blindly agreed to fight in a war that was never Judah's battle. But before they marched into battle, Jehoshaphat had a moment of hesitation. He requested that they seek God's counsel first. Ahab, in response, summoned 400 false prophets, all of whom told him exactly what he wanted to hear: "Go to war, you will be victorious." But something felt wrong. Sensing deception, Jehoshaphat asked, "Is there no prophet of the Lord here whom we can inquire of?" Reluctantly, Ahab called for Micaiah, a true prophet of God, one Ahab openly admitted to hating because he never gave favorable prophecies. And true to form, Micaiah delivered a chilling warning. "I saw all Israel scattered on the hills like sheep without a shepherd." 1 Kings 22 verse 17. In other words, Ahab would die if he went to battle. But Ahab ignored the prophecy. And Jehoshaphat, despite knowing better, still went with him. Once on the battlefield, Ahab revealed his true nature. He disguised himself as an ordinary soldier, but told Jehoshaphat to wear his royal robes. It was a calculated move. Ahab knew the enemy would target the king, and by dressing Jehoshaphat as a ruler, he was making him the prime target. Sure enough, as the battle raged, enemy soldiers mistook Jehoshaphat for Ahab and surrounded him. Death seemed inevitable. But in that moment of crisis, Jehoshaphat did what he should have done from the beginning. He cried out to God. And God, in his mercy, saved him. The enemy forces realized their mistake and let him go. Ahab, however, was not so fortunate. Despite his disguise, a random arrow struck him between the joints of his armor, and by sunset he was dead. The war was lost. Jehoshaphat returned home, shaken but alive. And as soon as he arrived, a prophet named Jehu confronted him with a sobering rebuke. "Should you help the wicked and love those who hate the Lord? Because of this, the wrath of the Lord is upon you." 2 Chronicles 19 verse 2. Jehoshaphat had nearly lost his life, not because of a weak army, not because of a lack of resources, but because he had aligned himself with someone who stood against God. His story serves as a powerful warning. Compromise with evil always comes at a cost. Even the godliest leaders can be led astray when they build alliances with those who reject God. Jehoshaphat was given a second chance. But would he learn from his mistake? Or would this dangerous pattern continue? The mistake that changed everything. You would think that after barely escaping with his life in battle, after hearing a direct warning from God, Jehoshaphat would never repeat the same mistake. But sometimes, lessons learned in crisis are forgotten in comfort. Despite God's rebuke for his alliance with Ahab, Jehoshaphat formed another partnership, this time with Ahab's son, Ahaziah. Ahaziah was no better than his father. He was a wicked king who followed in Ahab and Jezebel's footsteps, leading Israel deeper into idolatry and rebellion against God. But instead of distancing himself, Jehoshaphat agreed to a business deal with him. Together, they planned to build a fleet of trading ships. It was meant to be a strategic economic move, an opportunity to expand Judah's influence and wealth by sailing to distant lands for trade. On the surface, it seemed like a smart decision. But God does not measure success the way the world does. This was not just a financial partnership, it was a spiritual compromise. Jehoshaphat, a king who had spent years restoring Judah's faith, was now joining forces with a ruler who actively opposed God. And God did not allow it to prosper. Before the ships ever set sail, a storm came and destroyed them. The entire fleet, Jehoshaphat's grand investment, his vision for Judah's future trade, was shattered before it even had the chance to bring a single coin of profit. Then, another prophet came to him and spoke these words. "Because you have made an alliance with Ahaziah, the Lord has destroyed what you have built." 2 Chronicles 20 verse 37. Imagine the weight of those words. Jehoshaphat had seen God fight battles for him. He had experienced firsthand what happens when you trust in God's power. But now, he was experiencing the consequences of aligning with the wrong people. This was not just a financial loss, it was a clear message from God. No amount of success, no amount of wealth, no amount of strategy can justify partnering with those who stand against God. Jehoshaphat was a good king, a man of faith, and a leader who sought the Lord. But his greatest weakness was his repeated alliances with the wicked. And this time, his compromise would have lasting consequences, not just for him, but for the next generation. The cost of compromise: a legacy destroyed. Jehoshaphat had spent decades building a kingdom rooted in faith. He had seen miraculous victories, led Judah into revival, and experienced the protection of God firsthand. He tore down idols, strengthened his people's knowledge of God's law, and proved that trust in the Lord brought security greater than any military force. By all accounts, he should have left behind a legacy of faithfulness. But he didn't. Because one compromise outlived all his righteousness. Jehoshaphat's greatest mistake wasn't an act of war, a failed military campaign, or even his disastrous business alliance with Ahaziah. It was a decision made within the walls of his own palace. He allowed his son, Jehoram, to marry Athaliah, the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel. To many, this marriage may have seemed like a political strategy, an attempt to unite Judah and Israel. But Jehoshaphat should have known better. He had already seen firsthand the wickedness of Ahab's household. He had barely escaped with his life after fighting alongside Ahab in a war that God never wanted him to be part of. He had seen the corruption of Ahab's leadership and the devastating influence of Jezebel, one of the most evil women in biblical history. And yet, he willingly allowed their daughter into his own family. This one decision sealed the fate of Judah for years to come. When Jehoshaphat died, Jehoram became king, and everything fell apart almost instantly. A kingdom torn apart from the inside. The moment Jehoram took the throne, he murdered all of his brothers. These were his own flesh and blood, his rightful family, the sons of Jehoshaphat who could have led Judah with wisdom. But instead of ruling alongside them, he slaughtered them, a move that mirrored the brutality of Ahab's household. And that was just the beginning. Jehoram had no desire to follow in his father's footsteps. He reintroduced idol worship in Judah, undoing everything Jehoshaphat had built. The nation that had once stood strong in faith was now bowing before false gods, returning to the very sins that had once brought destruction upon their ancestors. Under Jehoram's rule, Judah fell into complete chaos. Enemies that had once feared Jehoshaphat now saw Judah as weak and vulnerable. The Edomites rebelled. The Philistines and the Arabs attacked. There was no divine protection, no miraculous victories, only suffering. The people of Judah, who had once prospered under Jehoshaphat, now lived under oppression. And then came the final blow. A cursed king, a tragic death. Jehoram's reign was not just marked by rebellion and destruction, it was cursed. The prophet Elijah, a man of God who had once confronted Ahab and Jezebel, now delivered a chilling prophecy against Jehoram. You have led Judah into sin, just as the house of Ahab led Israel into sin. Because of this, the Lord will strike you and your people with a great plague. You yourself will be afflicted with a disease of the bowels, until your intestines come out because of the disease, day after day. 2 Chronicles 21 verses 12 to 15. And just as Elijah had prophesied, Jehoram suffered a slow, agonizing death. His body wasted away from an incurable disease, and for 2 years he lived in torment. His suffering was a reflection of what he had brought upon Judah: pain, ruin, and destruction. But perhaps the most devastating part of his story is this: when he died, no one mourned him. The people of Judah, his own nation, had no love for him. There were no tributes, no ceremonies of honor, no songs of remembrance. He was buried, but not in the royal tombs. His legacy was not one of strength, faith, or leadership, it was one of disgrace. Jehoram died as he had lived, alone, cursed, and forgotten. Jehoshaphat's legacy, a tragic reminder. Jehoshaphat had been a good and godly king. He had prayed to God, trusted him in battle, and led Judah into one of its greatest revivals. But his compromises outlived his faithfulness. His faith died with him. His compromises continued for generations. His son became one of the most wicked rulers Judah had ever seen. Jehoshaphat had spent his life purging Judah of idols, but through one decision, his son's marriage, he brought Ahab and Jezebel's influence into his own house. And that single compromise changed the course of Judah's future. His story teaches us a sobering truth. It doesn't matter how strong you are today, if you compromise in the wrong places, the next generation will pay the price. So the question remains, what kind of legacy are you leaving? Will your faithfulness stand the test of time, or will your compromises outlive you? Jehoshaphat was a great king. He sought God, led his people in righteousness, and witnessed victories that could only be explained by divine intervention. He had everything a leader could hope for: strength, wisdom, and the favor of God. And yet, his story does not end in triumph, but in tragedy. Not because he abandoned his faith, not because he became corrupt, but because of one mistake, one compromise that shaped the next generation. Jehoshaphat didn't fall in battle. He didn't lose his kingdom to invaders. He lost something far greater: his legacy. Because when he allowed his son to marry into Ahab's wicked family, he unknowingly planted the seed of destruction. That decision, seemingly small at the time, unraveled everything he had built. His son, Jehoram, did not walk in his ways. He became a ruthless ruler, a murderer, an idolater, and a man who led Judah into spiritual ruin. And here's the painful truth: Jehoshaphat never lived to see the full consequences of his actions. By the time his compromise bore its bitter fruit, he was already gone. He had spent his life tearing down idols, but through one choice, he welcomed them back into his own house. This is what makes his story so sobering. The greatest danger to a leader is not failure. It is compromise. Because compromise rarely destroys you immediately, but it will destroy what comes after you. This isn't just a lesson from history. It's something I've seen in real life. I've watched people start strong in their faith, only to drift little by little, justifying small compromises along the way. I've seen leaders, businessmen, even pastors, who built something great, only to lose it all. Not because they openly rebelled against God, but because they let compromise take root. And the most heartbreaking part? Many of them never lived to see the full damage of their choices. And so, I ask you, what about you? Are the decisions you're making today setting up the next generation for blessing or for destruction? Are you standing firm, or are you allowing small compromises to creep in? Because today's choices will become tomorrow's legacy. Jehoshaphat's story is not just a history lesson. It is a wake-up call. If this message has spoken to you, don't just listen. Do something about it. Take a moment to reflect. Look at your life, your relationships, your choices. Where have you been compromising? And more importantly, what will you do to change it? Because your legacy is being written right now. If you are committed to staying faithful until the end, say it, declare it, write it down, and live by it. Because one day, your story will be told too. And the question is, what kind of legacy will you leave?